Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about Newspapers.com. I'm going to share with you some information about the website and some of my favorite tips for searching. Let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk first about why you want to use newspapers at all. One of the things that you might not recognize if you're new to family history research is just how much information is included in historical newspapers. I like to say newspapers were the Facebook of their day. People posted about some of the most mundane things, and you get a lot of detail about personal lives, information about who was visiting who and who had a party. You get details about vital records, births, marriages, and deaths. Sometimes those come in the form of official lists, list of births from the hospital, lists of people who were married that week or who may have applied for a marriage license. You might also get information about public notices of divorces, information about obituaries, of course, but then also death notices, funeral notices, condolences. Sometimes 2, 3, 10, 20 years after a person has died, family members might post information in the newspaper in memorial, stumbled over those words, of the person who had passed away on an anniversary of their death. Besides that, you might also get occupational details as little snippets of information are written up in a community. You might get clues as to what somebody was doing. You might also get clues to movement as people move around the country. Sometimes a newspaper might record if they came back to visit their family, and it will tell you where they are visiting from. So as family members move around, you see some of these newspapers giving you information about where they live now. You also get snippets of life stories, just clues and insight into their lives as things are reported on. And then views into historical context. That's probably one of the best uses of newspapers, is to read the local paper in the town where your family member lived, and you get kind of an idea of the environment in which they were living, the things that were facing them politically, religiously, in their environment, in their community. And so really great information can be found in newspapers. Now, one of the things that I often hear is, well, my ancestors weren't anybody famous or infamous, and so there won't be any information about them in newspapers. And that is not necessarily true. I have found information about people from all ends of the socioeconomic scale. I have found people from all different racial backgrounds, all different religious backgrounds. So don't just discount that your ancestors might not be included because they didn't maybe live a noteworthy life. I don't know that I believe that about anybody, but sometimes I hear that. And so recognize that newspapers could very well help you in your research, and they could break down some really long-standing brick walls for some of you. Now, Newspapers.com in particular has more than 5,800 newspaper titles from around the world. They have more than 336 million pages of newspapers, and they're adding millions more every month. They have a little ticker on their website. As a matter of fact, I can show that to you just here. You'll see in the top corner there, they have a ticker of how many pages of newspapers they have scanned. So they create a digital scan of the newspaper image. Then we have a technology, OCR technology, which essentially allows a computer to read that page in order to create a searchable index for that particular page of text. So more than 336 million pages. Those newspapers date all the way back into the 1700s and all the way to today. And then one of the things you need to be aware of is there are 2 levels of subscription to Newspapers.com. One is the basic subscription, and then the other one is what we call our publisher's extra subscription. Now, the basic subscription is what you have available to you if you have an Ancestry All Access subscription. So if you have purchased an Ancestry All Access subscription, that gives you access to all the records on Ancestry.com from all over the world, all 20 some odd billion of them. It also gives you access to all the records on Fold3.com, and then it gives you access to the basic subscription on Newspapers.com. Now, here is the difference. The publisher's extra subscription. So Ancestry currently has relationships with several newspaper publishers. And they have content, newspapers that they are publishing on a regular basis, that they still hold the copyright for. And so Ancestry cannot just place those on a website because there are some copyright restrictions in place. But because of our agreements with these organizations, it allows us to create digital copies of the records or of the newspapers that these particular publishers hold the rights to, but we have to charge a little bit extra because that money is going to those publishers. So that's the difference. So what you're going to notice on Newspapers.com is you will occasionally see search results with this little plus sign, this little orange plus sign here, and the words publisher extra. You may see that. So just want to make sure you understand what the difference is there. So if you have an Ancestry All Access subscription, you have access to the basic subscription, Newspapers.com subscription, which is mostly all the historical newspapers, and then the stuff that's still in copyright, and copyright, it varies depending, but the major copyright changes took place in 1922, are going to be part of that publisher's extra collection. So that is what you're getting with Newspapers.com. Now let's talk about how to search it. There's a lot of different ways, just like on Ancestry, there are a lot of different ways to search, and because there's so much content, we try to provide you as many ways into that content as possible. I'll tell you just some of my favorite methodology for searching. First is just use that search box. It's just a search box you can see here on the home page, and just search for everything, anything. Just search and see what comes up, and then use filters to kind of narrow your way down from there. So for example, if I was looking for a particular article about anybody with the last name of Cowan, I could type that in. It's going to tell me that there are 2,677,264 matches or pages, newspaper pages that match that query. So then I can use these filters over here, and I can filter it down to a specific time and or place. So I can narrow it by a date or a date range, and that can be a specific date or a set of years. I can also narrow it by a particular location. So I can click on a state on the map here. I can also click over to this World tab, select a country, and get information for newspapers for one of those countries for my search query. So in my case, a lot of my family is from the state of Ohio. Now, if you're not great at geography, you can just move your mouse around and it will pop up to tell you what state it is that you're hovering over. Or you can just type in the name of the state, or you can look for the state in the list here and click on it that way. Now in my case, like I said, most of my family is from the state of Ohio. Also, I've got family in the state of Pennsylvania, some in the state of West Virginia, right? So that little cluster of states there. And you'll notice that as I click these states, it adds them up here at the top to my search query. So now I've taken that list of a couple million search results down to 305,000. I can then just continue to filter. Let's say mostly what I'm interested in is anything from 1850 to 1900. And then I can click search. Now I'm down to 38,000, right? Maybe what I'm really interested in is a particular member of the Cowan family. Now I'm down to 16,000. So hopefully you can see what we're doing here. This is what we call iterative searching. It is one of my favorite search strategies. Now some people like to go the other direction. They like to start super specific and then loosen up their search results. I prefer to start really general and then tighten them up as I go. It's just a matter of preference how you like to do that. Decide you want to do a new search, just click on the newspapers logo up here. Takes you right back to the newspapers.com homepage. You can start a new search. So that is just a search strategy where you can just search everything on the site, see what pops up, and then use the filters to get more specific about what you want. Now, another way, and this is something I encourage you to do if you're not familiar at all with newspapers.com, is to see what newspapers even exist. So one of the things, much like on Ancestry.com, where I encourage you to use the card catalog, I encourage you to use the browse features on Newspapers.com to see what exists. Because I don't want you searching and searching and searching for something that hasn't even been digitized yet. So we give you 3 ways to browse through to see what newspapers are out there. One is actually the word browse. I'll show you that in a minute. One is by clicking on papers, and one is by clicking on the map, the link to the map. So you're going to see those links here, browse and papers here in the header. And then to see the map, you see this little map pin under the search bar where it says search papers by location. So if I click up here on browse, what it's going to do is it's going to take me to a browse structure. For those of you who have used fold3.com, this is very similar to that, where you select a country and then you select a smaller jurisdiction. In the case of the United States, that's typically going to be a specific state. So if I want to come here and I'm going to select Ohio, and then it will tell me what city papers are available. Now, keep in mind, you need to be a little bit familiar with the geography of where your ancestor lived. Because you may look through this list of cities, and maybe the city where your ancestor lived isn't listed. But if you're very familiar with the adjacent cities, you might be able to figure out which newspaper would have reported on the happenings in the town where your ancestor lived. So not every town had a paper, though many did, but having that kind of understanding of geography is going to be helpful when you get to this particular list. Now, my family happens to be from Ashland, Ohio, and this tells me that the Ashland, Ohio States and Union, that's the name of the newspaper, and then over here it tells me the 18 years of that newspaper that are available, starting in 1852, going through 1871. Now I can click here on one of those years, then it will tell me what months are available for that particular year. Click on a particular month and it will tell me what dates are available. Now, one of the things that you need to be familiar with about historical newspapers in particular, one is that sometimes you'll see gaps. Like here you'll see the paper we only have April through December. Now, I could do a little bit of investigation and figure out, did January, February, and March not exist because they didn't publish a newspaper in 1868 for those 3 months for some reason? Or is it possible that those 3 months have been lost and nobody's ever been able to recover a copy of the newspapers for 1868 for those months? So sometimes you'll see gaps, and it's for lots of different reasons. Most often when you're looking at historical newspapers back in the 1800s and the 1700s, it's because certain sections of papers or certain dates of certain papers were either never published because of some type of business reason. Maybe the printing shop was shut down for a while. Maybe there were some financial troubles because maybe there was a war or something, like there's lots of reasons why they might not have published a newspaper for a particular period of time. Or it could be that the newspapers that were published during that time period, there's never been copies found in order to create a digital record of those. So lots of different reasons. The other thing you need to be aware of when you look at the dates is that a lot of small town papers especially would only publish once a week or twice a month. And so you won't see complete runs of dates. Sometimes you'll see more sporadic dates. In this case, if you look, every one of these newspapers was on a Wednesday. So you have the date and then the day of the week. And so that just tells me that it's likely that this was a weekly paper. So then you click on the date, and then it'll tell me there were 4 pages to that newspaper that day. I can go to the first page for that newspaper on that date, and using my image tools here, I can zoom in and out, and I can actually read the newspaper that my ancestors were reading in Ashland, Ohio in August of 1868, which I just think is super cool. And click and drag it around, do it that way. You can also search on any page. So I can read this just like I would read a newspaper today. Do people still read newspapers? I can click find, and I can actually look for specific text on this specific page. And it will highlight that text and take me to that particular article. In this case, there are 2 hits to my search term. So I just then use the arrow and it will move me to the next term, which it has highlighted. So once you get to a paper, you can do a find. I can then work my way page by page through the 4 pages of this newspaper on this date. I can use a little breadcrumb trail up here to go to the next paper if I want to read the next paper, and so on. So that's the way to browse a set of newspapers. The other thing you can do is you can actually look and see what papers exist. Okay. Now, again, this is kind of similar to the card catalog idea on Ancestry. If you're familiar with that, it can give you some information about what exists. You'll see those filters there down the left-hand side of your screen. So I could filter to a specific location. So I could go to Oregon, for example, and I can see here are all of the newspapers that Ancestry has for that particular place. Now these are going to be listed alphabetically by the name of the paper. So one of the things you'll notice here, there's a lot of things called the Daily, right? The Daily Capital Journal out of Salem, Oregon, or the Daily Gazette Times out of Corvallis, Oregon. You'll also notice these have that little orange Publisher's Extra symbol on them. So these are newspapers that Ancestry has in an agreement with a particular publisher. So these would be only available to you if you have the Publisher's Extra subscription. You'll notice these ones down here, the Daily Mountaineer out of the Dalles, the Daily Oregonian out of Portland. Those do not have the Publisher's Extra symbol on them. So if you have the basic subscription in newspapers.com, you have full access to these particular titles. Now, they are alphabetical by the name of the paper, not by the city. So one of the things you'll notice here, we go from Corvallis to Salem to Corvallis because of the name of the paper, not because they're alphabetical by a particular city. So you can search for specific towns, you can search by specific date ranges. So this will just give you an idea of what exists. Now you'll notice you also can type in keywords. So if you have an idea of what the newspaper was called, I can, for example, let's see if my local paper is in here. It's not. I maybe should have checked that before, but I went to high school in a town in Oregon, and they publish a newspaper now, and it looks like Ancestry does not yet have that. But of course, most of the news about my little town is going to be coming out of the greater Portland area. So I can type in Portland, and you'll see there are 7 newspapers that have been published out of Portland, Oregon over time. And it'll tell you exactly what the date ranges are for that particular run for that paper, and then how many pages of that newspaper have been digitized and placed online here at newspapers.com. So you'll see sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's just a little bit. Same thing with databases anywhere. Just because a database has fewer pages or fewer records does not make it any less valuable. If your ancestors are found in these 36 pages, you're glad to have them. So don't discount them just because they only have a few pages. But when there are more pages, it is more likely that you're going to find more information about more people. So we try to give you a good mix of both large, big city newspapers, as well as small town papers and small runs of small newspaper organizations. So that is how you search by paper. So you can browse, you can go by paper, and then we have the final way to browse into the records, which is by location. So I can come here and it's just a giant map, and it allows me to filter down based on location. And you can see we have some coverage in various parts of the world. We tell you how many newspapers we have for each of the regions. In the United States, for example, we have broken the regions down west, central, and eastern. So I can click on Western United States, and then it breaks it out by a specific location on the map. So I could come in here and pull up maps here, or the newspapers here near where I live. I can click on this one, right? It'll tell me there, and each time you click, it just drills in and drills in and drills in. Now, the Daily Herald is the local newspaper here, just south of where we are. The Ancestry offices are here in Lehi, Utah. The run of those papers is from 1930 to 1977. Now, my parents were both born and raised in California. All four of my younger siblings were born and raised in California. I was actually born here in Utah, and so my birth announcement is included in the Provo Daily Herald, and so I might want to go search that. So anytime you click on a paper, it will take you to a search box where you can search just that specific newspaper. And it will give you information about any mentions, and again, you can search it as broadly or as narrowly as you want to get the information that you're looking for, and then you can filter using the date fields in this case, because you're already looking at a specific newspaper. So that is the way that you get into the records. That's how you get into the records. Let me just share with you some of my favorite search tips. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is play around with using quotes in order to search for exact phrases. So I can put in Cowan, and even in the Daily Herald, the small Provo, Utah newspaper, there's still 3,600 search results. But I can do a search in quotes, for example, and I can find anywhere where that exact phrase shows up in a newspaper. So one of the things you need to get used to playing with is, as you are looking for your ancestors, try searching for them by their full name, first, middle, last. Try searching for them with their first name, their middle initial, and their last name. Try searching for them by their first and their last name. Try searching for them by just their first initial or their first and middle initial and their last name. So lots of different ways that people may have appeared in the newspapers. Even if your ancestor never went by just their initials, remember that newspapers are often concerned about space. And so sometimes they'll shorten somebody's name just to their initials because they have some space concerns that they were trying to address. And so even if that's not a way that your ancestor was typically known, they might be listed in a newspaper article that way. And that's something you might not expect. So be sure to do searches where people are only listed by their initials. And again, you're most likely going to want to use that in quotes in concert with their last name. Now, even though you do a search of something in quotes, you can also add information that is not in quotes. So I've got Stephen R. Cowan here in quotes because I'm looking for that exact phrase, but then I'm going to add a word to see if it gives me any additional search results. And then sometimes you have to play around with that a little bit, right? Remove a middle name, add a middle name, remove a middle initial, add a middle initial. In this case, when I played around with it just enough, as you just saw me do, I came up with my parents' wedding announcement. So that's a really great way to kind of, you play around with it till you find what it is that you want, because you don't know how the newspaper recorded that information. Use lots of different combinations. Sometimes I'll use a surname with a location and a time frame. Sometimes I'll use just given names for women in particular where I'm not sure maybe who they married or how they're going to appear. I might use their given name. If I know they lived in a specific town, I might drop in the name of that town and then a specific time frame, maybe even a 10 or 20 year time frame, but a time frame to see what pops that might give me additional clues. Using some of these search techniques, and then this last one, which is that women may be listed by their husband's name. And so if you've searched for a woman with her name, try searching for her husband's name and add a Mrs. onto the front of it. And one of the things that you'll find is particularly, at least in my experience, through about the 1920s through the 1960s or 70s, that seemed to be a common thing that happened in newspaper reporting, even and especially after someone had passed away. If the husband had passed away and the woman was being listed, maybe as the parent of her daughter who's getting married, or in some kind of a civic role or responsibility, she might be listed by her husband's name, Mrs. John Smith. So be sure to search for those. And like I said, using these, I have found all sorts of gold mines of information. I use Newspaperscom to search for a lot of things, especially as it relates to my DNA matches, as I'm trying to reconstruct family trees for my DNA matches to figure out where they connect with me. I use it when I'm doing some of that descendancy research, trying to figure out, who the children of my third great grandfather were and who each of them married. Sometimes I use it, like I said, just to read about what was going on in the community where my family lived so that I get a feel for the historical context and the time and the place in which they were living. But the idea is that as you're searching for these things, sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. Sometimes you'll have to do 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 different ways to search before you find them. Sometimes you may find them. Even if you find something about them, don't stop there. Try the other 5 or 6 searches because you may find more about them. So just because somebody's listed as, S.R. Cowan in one newspaper article, he might be listed as Stephen Ross Cowan in another and Stephen R. Cowan in a third. And so you don't want to stop at that first discovery. You want to make sure that you keep trying those different ways. Another thing to keep in mind, or another way to search sometimes, is to flip the names, right? Cowan Stephen, because maybe it was listed in a list of voters or property owners, or maybe it's a list of court cases or divorce proceedings or marriage licenses, and that's just the way that the newspaper received the list from whatever organization where they're publishing it in the newspaper. So sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. Okay, so we talked about the find on page to highlight. Let's talk about a couple other features. So here is this wedding announcement for my parents. When I click on it, it takes me to the full page of the newspaper, and you'll see here, here's the wedding announcement at the bottom of the page. If I zoom out, I can see the entire page of the newspaper. Included some great recipes there for the Chinese New Year, a little bit of other things. So a little bit of context if I zoom out. Like I mentioned, if you do the find, it will highlight the information on the page and take you right to where on the page that information is listed. The other feature we have here is our clipping feature. So that allows you to actually highlight the specific article. Now, I had a grandmother who was a huge proponent of newspaper clippings. When we cleaned out her house, we found hundreds of them. Right? She clipped recipes, and she'd clip coupons, and she'd clip obituaries, and she clipped all the things. And so this is that same concept. Instead of actually physically cutting them out of a newspaper, though, you're just going to create a clipping, and you can scroll your way over here to do that so that you get the whole clipping. You can make a little note about it so that you remember the details, so that when you go to view your clippings, which you can do up here in the menu bar, you'll see a list of all the things you have clipped, and those details might help you so you don't have to click through to view it every time to see what it was you clipped. Okay, so that's clippings. It just saves them in this clippings file on your newspapers.com account so that you have access to them without having to research for them or find them on the page again. Now, we have a couple of other features. We also allow you to share newspaper clippings. You can save them to your hard drive. You can email them to a family member, or you can share them through social media with friends and family that way. So it allows you to share some of the discoveries that you're making. And like I said, this isn't just for family history. Newspapers.com is really about social history too. Newspapers are a great way to gain an insight into what was going on. And I have found some outrageous articles in historic newspapers from 100, 150 years ago that I just find delightful as this view into what was going on in the times. And I've shared those out with people to have commentary on them, or to start a discussion or a conversation. So we allow you to do that. And then you'll notice this giant green Save to Ancestry button. That in particular is one of my favorite features on Ancestry.com. It allows me to create a clipping. And then when I click Save to Ancestry, it will bring up my account information, and it will allow me to say, I want to save it to this tree on my account, and I'm going to save it to this person in that tree. And then you save it to that person, and then when you go into your Ancestry.com online tree, there is a link there to that newspaper clipping. So we give you lots of ways to find information, to clip it, to share it, and to save it to Ancestry, and I hope you will use those tools. Well, that is all I have prepared for you today. If you have questions about how to use newspapers.com, or if something wasn't clear today, just leave a comment here on the YouTube video. I do review those comments and will respond if you've got a specific question. Also, we're wrapping up the year here, and I'm getting ready to publish the calendar for video topics for January and February, and maybe even March. And so if you've got ideas or suggestions for things that you would like covered that you haven't seen here on YouTube in the playlist for the desktop education on the Ancestry channel, please email me at ask@ancestry.com with any suggestions you have for topics you would like discussed in upcoming videos. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.